The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you all so much for joining me today. I hope wherever you are that it's a beautiful Wednesday morning, and that we're excited to hear about Capture Process Designer and to look into some custom scan queues. So yeah, again, welcome. Today's webinar is from the Naviant's Customer Care Group. Here's a snapshot of the team's composition. Presenting today is myself, Paul Kegler. Just a couple of admin notes here before we get started. So the audience voice is muted. I do have the question box open and available for you to type either comments or questions in there at any time. And then, of course, as usual, previous webinars can always be requested via naviant.com/resources/video. So for today's agenda, we're going to be going over some key features of Capture Process Designer, some of the limitations of what are now considered legacy scan queues, some Capture Process Designer fundamentals, and some key concepts that it's important to understand. And then lastly, we'll jump into a software demonstration. All right, so Capture Process Designer. So the OnBase Capture Process Designer provides a streamlined method for improving your batch processing. Similar to configuring OnBase workflow, the Capture Process Designer is constructed on OnBase Studio, where you'll be able to build the desired batch processing steps and the document paths that take advantage of the advanced features of Capture Process Designer. So Capture Process Designer, or CPD, is new as of OnBase 16, and no additional licensing is required. As long as you have access to document imaging, you have access to CPD. These custom scan queues are only available within the Unity client, and the actual configuration takes place within OnBase Studio. So some key features here. As I mentioned, these custom scan queues are configured within OnBase Studio, so that same look and feel you're already familiar with can be leveraged here. What's unique about Capture Process Designer is that it allows you to configure multiple import paths for documents that you want to enter a single scan queue. Documents can be brought in via ad hoc scanning, dip, sweeping, and more. Each of these import steps can be configured with different routing logic for each status step. Also, CPD allows you to transition documents based on their document type, their current status, or specific keyword values into different steps within your capture process, different scan queues, or even right into workflow. And batches can be sent into any step at any time. And with what are referred to as custom scan queues, there is no need to wait for the entire batch to make it through a process. A document can be routed to workflow at any point in the process and be routed right back in at any point as well. Much like workflow, you can configure custom scan queues that your users can select during the process to make certain determinations. These ad hoc evaluators allow documents to be transitioned based upon user input. So before I get too into why and how Capture Process Designer is so powerful, I first need to outline what are now considered legacy scan queues. First of all, configuring scan queues solely via OnBase configuration can be confusing, as there are a multitude of process options that can be selected, and it's not clear, based on just these checkboxes, when and how this logic is being applied to your documents. Additionally, with legacy scan queues, documents may not be separated as expected if barcodes are not read correctly. If the image quality is poor, images must be relocated and rescanned, preventing the rest of the batch from moving forward in the batch process. Also with legacy scan queues, there's no way to reprocess a single barcode document in the same batch. This would require all barcode documents to be reprocessed. So these legacy scan queues are a very linear process. As you can see, we have from the top to the bottom here our usual processes that we're familiar with. And in this kind of type of configuration, there's multiple opportunities for bottlenecks. So when is it beneficial for your organization to leverage Capture Process Designer and create a custom scan queue? Here we have some concerns which would make a great potential use case to leverage a custom scan queue via Capture Process Designer. Let's say your organization has a need to route documents differently based on how they were brought in, either scanned or swept or what have you. And you're working with invoices and purchase orders that are being brought in electronically. You need to be able to classify and index these documents appropriately. And like most organizations, you have different levels of verification within your accounts payable department. So you need to the ability to route these documents and make decisions on them accordingly as they're being brought into your system. And let's say your organization already has a rock-solid workflow process for the handling and management of payment for your invoices. So you need to ensure that the correct document types are being set and the initial index keyword values are correct to ensure this process runs smoothly. Well, with CPD, you can have different routing logic for different import points in the same scan queue. Documents that were scanned in versus existing electronic documents, for example. And with CPD, you can add documents to workflow at any time. You can also build in exception handling and even control user security for individual process steps. So the list of benefits go on, and due to the ability to get very granular and specific within your capture process. And building one is very simple due to these custom scan keys being configured via OnBase Studio. So keeping the OnBase theme of this being a point-and-click configurable solution. So this webinar is intended to be a little more technical. So we are going to go over the configuration of a custom scan queue via the Capture Process Designer. But before I dive into the actual creation of these custom scan queues via CPD and get into some of the best practices, etc., we need to cover the basics so we understand the options that are available to us within this module. So let's take a look at the layout of the Capture Process Designer within OnBase Studio. As you can see, this is a very familiar look and feel of OnBase. OnBase Studio here, you have your tabs for workflow and everything. So on the left-hand side here, we have the toolbox. And this is where all the different status steps of your custom scan queue can be configured. Next, we have the process tree, allowing you to see all the scan queues that have been configured with the checkbox of Enable Capture Process Designer on them, or custom scan queues that were created right from OnBase Studio. So these are viewed within the Capture Process tab. And in this example, I only have a single capture process configured, but notice how it's marked with the status of active. That's something I'll get into a little more later on. Then, of course, we have our graphical layout, giving a visual representation of the different status steps within the capture process and how they relate to one another. And on the far right here, we have the properties pane, which essentially is all of those same settings contained within the process options in OnBase configuration, but with the ability to get much more granular on the logic and actions that are taking place. Each step you configure within Capture Process Designer will have its own unique property pane for individual configuration. And across the top here, we have the options to create a custom scan queue right from the Capture Process Designer, without the need to create one first from within OnBase configuration. Existing legacy scan queues can also be converted into custom scan queues via a checkbox within configuration, allowing you to modify and manipulate them from within this layout. And when you have the Capture Process Designer tab, or Capture Process tab selected, the Design and Format tabs become available as well, giving you access to these evaluators, which are used to transition items between steps. So now that we've taken a look at the overall layout, let's get into the available actions and steps we can configure. So first of all, actions and steps replace status queues. So a step can be any of the available options within the toolbox here, configured with specific settings per each step. Your available actions on the modules, your available actions are based on the modules that you're licensed for. So as you can see here, we have actions such as ICAP or Intelligent Capture for accounts payable available here in this example. With the simple drag and drop functionality that I'll be demonstrating later, you can add as many actions as you would like to your custom scan queue. Also, each one of these steps, once implemented, has their own unique properties pane that will be displayed, which I noted earlier. Within this properties pane for each step that you configure is a user group tab, allowing you to control which user groups will have access to this particular step, much like controlling access to individual queues within workflow. This is a powerful option that allows you to completely hide steps from users and be able to leverage a layered approach to exception handling and QA review. Okay, so it looks like some are having some audio issues here. Give me a moment and I'll see what I can do about that.
Okay, so I believe I may have corrected the audio issue. So yeah, if we could just reach out and just let me know if the audio is any better currently than it was previously. Perfect. All right, well, I apologize about that. Okay, so let's go ahead and move forward here. All right, so yeah, so we're going to dive into each one of these actions and steps that are available within this toolbox. So starting right from the top, let's run through briefly which each of these actions and steps can be leveraged for within your custom scan queue. Right away here, we have an option that was previously unavailable within legacy scan queues, the exception step. You can use this option to hold documents that don't meet the evaluations that you're expecting within the scan process. For example, if a document type that isn't configured for the scan queue comes in, it'll be routed to this exception step so that a manager can come in and take action on it and either route it to another scan queue or simply purge the document completely. Waiting is another step that was previously unavailable until Capture Process Designer. This is a place for documents to hold before advancing to another step in your process. An excellent example of when to use a waiting step is when you're performing image quality review. So this is where a user or group of users have been assigned to ensure that the clarity of a scanned image is up to par, and either mark them for rescan or clear them to advance in the process. You can leverage a waiting step to hold the documents that have been cleared until the ones that were marked for rescan have passed the image quality review step, and then have all the documents of that batch continue on together. This is useful in the case of barcode processing, where you wouldn't want the barcode process to execute until all the documents of the batch are together, because they would end up with incorrect document splitting and so on. So the import step, and this is always going to be the first step in your capture process. You can use multiple import steps to determine how documents will be routed based on how they were acquired. So the default import will route everything into the scan queue regardless of how it was brought in. And you can see here in the sweep settings that we can even set a default directory. You can also assign of any barcode process available within your database, which we executed at scan time. So there's several more options within this import step, and I'll be getting into more detail on that once we do the demo here. So the export step allows you to export documents to either another custom scan queue or legacy scan queue. And as you can see here, we have the option to export this into a specific status step of any custom scan queue. And the checkbox here is useful for when you're exporting, let's say, all of the documents of a batch are getting moved out. And then you have some verification reports that may be remaining. This will clean those up for those. So index. This, of course, is used to index documents. This can function just like an awaiting index status of a legacy scan queue. And as you can see, we only have one index option available here in our toolbox. That's because we can create this index step and then select the specialized index options that we would like, and then simply name it accordingly. There are a plethora of options that can be configured here to include indexing permissions and what the main enter key and numeric enter keys will do while an indexer is operating within this step. All the options available here are what were previously available for legacy scan queues within the indexing tab of the process options within OnBase configuration. But with a legacy scan queue, any of your indexing settings would apply across the entire scan queue. What makes Capture Process Designer so powerful is that we can configure multiple indexing steps with different options selected. So you can have different indexers indexing different types of documents in unique ways, all within the same capture process. The verify step replaces the idea of a QA manager review in a legacy scan queue. And as you can see, within the toolbox, similar to the index option, there are not multiple types of verify. These specialized settings are configured within the properties pane, and then multiples can be applied within the applied and configured accordingly. And just like any other step within Capture Process Designer, you can control which user groups have access to this specific step, allowing you to create multiple layers of verification within your capture process. So rescan replaces the idea of the awaiting rescan queue within a legacy scan queue. You'll see that we only have a few options here. Re-verify images routes everything from rescan back to an image quality review step. And the other option here is pretty self-explanatory, to not allow users to change documents that were marked as OK. So next up, the document separation step. So this replaces the awaiting document separation within a legacy scan queue. You can see here that there are not a lot of options available here other than to clear the keywords upon document separation. Document separations interface, once selected within the Unity client within batch processing, is used to separate multi-page documents, and you can even add pages to a document at this point via the Browse To or Scan In features. So image quality review. This step is used by your users to mark documents for rescan if the image quality is poor, or to mark them as okay. These documents can then be routed through the process according to the user's selection. These types of image quality review steps are important, especially with, let's say, barcode processing, where you need to ensure that you have a good scan of that barcode in order for your barcode process to execute appropriately. The only available option here for this step is to disable the ability for your QA personnel to turn on the auto scrolling feature. So image processing. So we have the option to have these images be processed by the data capture server or the OnBase client via this checkbox. By expanding out this dropdown, you can select all of the image processing options that would normally be selected via the image processing tab of the scan queue process options within OnBase configuration, but they will be executed on the data capture server. So all of the same options are available to be run from the data capture server except for 3. And those would be convert document to image file format, combine image documents, and execute VB script. So that being said, there are advantages to using the data capture server to execute your image processing over using the OnBase client. And that's because the data capture server is a 64-bit process and is multi-threaded. So you will see a performance increase. So next up, we have the barcode step. And this really replaces the idea of a separate barcode processing queue of a legacy scan queue. You can see that within the properties pane, we have the option to have the OnBase client execute the barcode process. So the client would need to have either the scan auto commit switch applied or running as a Windows service. With these custom scan queues, however, we now have the option to select a configured barcode process here, which will leverage the data capture server to execute that barcode process. We also have some additional processing options such as appending, blank page separation, and patch codes. So iClass, or intelligent classification, was new as of OnBase 17. And so just like the other OCR type steps, the configuration is completed within OnBase config. So if you're unaware or unfamiliar with iClass, so this is it's a great product that can be used to automatically classify document types based on the actual content of a page. So feel free to reach out to us here at Naviant or to check out Highland's community if you're interested in learning more about this module. So the advanced capture step will be placed in your process, where you want the advanced capture to occur. And as you can see, there is only one option here within the properties, and that's because advanced capture is only available to be processed with the OnBase client. So the OnBase client running either interactively with the scan auto index switch or as a Windows service, when documents hit this status step, will pick up these batches and process all advanced capture templates that are assigned to your scan queue. So next we have intelligent capture for accounts payable, or ICAP. So these checkboxes within the property panes of always require document verification, which will automatically route every document to a verify step after ICAP processing executes. And the disable auto document separation, which prevents ICAP from separating documents. But what's unique about adding an ICAP step to your capture process is that when you do so, an indexing step pre-labeled as ICAP indexing will be brought in as well. This is because of the way ICAP operates in conjunction with your end users. ICAP will search each invoice for unique indicators to identify a vendor. And based on the vendor, we'll know to look in specific locations on that invoice for the keyword values you're looking to obtain. So an indexing step is required after this occurs, so your indexers can continue to train the software and improve its accuracy over time. So next we have an OCR option. And so this is the full page OCR, and this processing is done via the data capture server. And we only have one setting here, which is to respect lines per page. Any additional settings are configured within OnBase configuration for your OCR format. So the PDF conversion step is used to create a PDF rendition of an image document. And as you can see, this step can only be run via the OnBase client, leveraging the Scan Auto PDF switch. So custom processing, and this is really one of those unique tools about Capture Process Designer, which aids it in being so powerful. So there are the custom processing options that can be configured within OnBase configuration as well. So you do have the option to leverage the OnBase client to perform those actions. What's unique within Capture Process Designer is the ability to send documents into a workflow lifecycle at any point in time within your capture process. Once you select this checkbox, you can use the drop-down here to select any lifecycle that you have configured within your environment, or you can select none. By selecting none, you are still able to send these documents into workflow, but which lifecycle they go to will be based on the document type assigned to that document and the lifecycles that are configured to interact with them. So basically, yeah, so you can send it to a specific workflow lifecycle, or simply let the configuration of your workflow lifecycles take effect by simply sending those documents to workflow and allowing the document types to be picked up by those individual lifecycles. You also have the ability to change the document status, or even the document type, to any document that is assigned to this capture process. And the ability to execute a script at any point as well. And just like within workflow, the order in which logic is being applied to your documents can be vital. So with this process order option, you can manipulate the order in which the custom processing is occurring on your document. Lastly, we have awaiting commit. And this is where documents will be committed from within your scan queue. And this will always be the last step of your capture process. Unless, of course, you simply configure all the documents to be routed to an export step, sending them to another scan queue. So your custom scan queue and your capture process will either always end with either awaiting commit or a complete export to another scan queue. So there are a few new concepts that need to be discussed in order to better understand Capture Process Designer. I mentioned that with the custom processing, you can change a document status. And so document statuses are important to understand. There are 3 available statuses that a document can be in while in a custom scan queue. There's indexed, unindexed, and needs rescan. Certain actions or processes cannot be executed on documents unless they are in the correct status. For example, documents cannot be added to workflow unless they are in an indexed status. And when a document goes through an automated OCR processor, such as ICAP or advanced capture, any keyword values will not be overwritten unless the document is in a status of unindexed. So with the addition of Capture Process Designer, a new workflow action type was created as well, the Add Document to Scan Queue process. So the only scan queues that will be available for selection here for this action are these new custom scan queues. So with the option to select a specific status step that you want the document to be added to as well. The idea of document sets were created to facilitate the ability to have documents of the same batch exist within multiple different status steps at any time within your capture process. So multiple document sets can be within a batch at one time, but all the document sets will join together into one before the batch is actually committed. This allows you to maintain a constant batch number, whereas in a legacy scan queue, through the use of scan queue filtering, a new batch number is created if you were to send this to a different scan queue, causing you to lose the audit history for your individual batches. All right, so now that we've covered the fundamentals, let's jump into some software demonstration. Just a moment here as I change focus. All right. So I did mention that you have the ability to update an existing legacy scan queue into a custom scan queue so that you can manipulate it within Capture Process Designer. So I just wanted to outline that real quick. So just, as before, within OnBase configuration, the import tab, and then down to scan queues. So let's say this is an existing scan queue process. So we'll go ahead and create that. And so when you are creating the new scan queue, it does give you the option to copy all of the same configuration settings for any pre-existing scan queue. For this one, we'll just go ahead and hit none, select OK, and then it's going to want to select a disk group for where we want these to be saved. And so let's go ahead and assign some users to the scan queue. Just grab kind of all these AP fellows. Perfect. All right, so now we have these process options. And so a lot of these are, going to be familiar. We just walked through all of those action steps within the toolbox. And so you can see that all of those same options are available here, but that, doing so with an OnBase configuration doesn't really give you a good visual representation of what's actually going on. And so let's go ahead and just select some options. All right. That's good for now for that. So let's set up a default directory. And barcode process. Some indexing options. And so here I'm just trying to select some so that once we get into Capture Process Designer, you'll see that, some of these options are, they're still available there and still have been set up. So let's select some QA options here. And an image processing step as well. So let's set up like a despeckle step. So image enhancement. So let's go ahead and add that. And despeckle, and we'll just keep the default values. All right, and then so that checkbox I referenced before that is selected to enable a scan queue to be manipulated within Capture Process Designer is right here. This enable Capture Process Designer Unity client only. And so once selected, it is going to give you this helpful warning message that converting the scan queue, can only be manipulated within Unity client, and once this is done, cannot be undone. And so we'll go ahead and do that. So once that type of checkbox is selected, a simple cache refresh is not enough to make it available. So we do need to perform an IIS reset. So as that updates, I'll go ahead and get into Studio here. All right, but yeah, so whereas before that scan queue that, let's say, we already have existing, which is, this guy right here. And then, so here's our processing options. And so it's not, the most intuitive thing in the world. But since we've selected that checkbox, we got this capture process. And so just like life cycles, you can, by double clicking, you'll actually be checking these out. So it operates at a repository base, so that only one user at a time can be making changes to these scan queues. And so as you can see, this existing scan queue process that we just, check that box to make it available here, all of those same options are here. So with this import step, you can see that we have that default scan, that sweep directory was already in there. We have those QA steps that we had. And so that existing scan queue process is now within Capture Process Designer, and we can manipulate it, accordingly, and make changes to how these documents are being evaluated. So right from here, as I mentioned before, we do have the ability to create a new custom scan queue right from within OnBase Studio, or adding additional capture processes to a single scan queue. And so this will be test. And so just like when you're creating a new capture process, you do have the options to copy any of the existing scan queues or capture processes that are already configured. And so let's go ahead and check that out. But yeah, so the layout I went over earlier, but yeah, so that drag and drop functionality, obviously to start any kind of process, is with an import step. So you just simply drop it over there. All of those import settings are all available in this properties pane. And so a best practice is to ensure that you are getting, specific when it comes to naming these different steps, because the way in which they're named here is the way in which they'll appear within the Unity client. So you can see that by updating the name, you right-click rename, or clicking right in there, or simply changing the name over here will perform that as well. But yeah, so let's go ahead and just kind of walk through building an example custom capture process. And so this one I wanted to be a sweep import. So we'll go ahead and make that a sweep. And I see the default directory was already selected there. And let's have more than one way to bring documents into the scan queue. So this will be demo workflow import. Okay, so we'll make that a workflow. And so with those user group permissions, as far as your users interacting with the batch processing itself, we're not going to want all of our users to be able to see this, because it'll just be confusing. They won't know what that step is. So we'll simply remove that option from them. So they won't even see that import step. So once these documents are brought in, let's send it to like an ICAP processing step. So as I mentioned before, when you bring in an ICAP processing step, an indexing step is automatically created as well. And so by selecting a default evaluator for, so I guess I'll get into evaluators just a moment here then. Let's do that. So evaluators are kind of that logic that has you transition those documents between these status steps. And so in that design tab and the evaluator up here, you simply click and drag to where you want those documents to go. And for the sweep import, we'll just select the default evaluator, meaning that everything that hits this status step right here, we'll just go ahead and transition to this next ICAP processing step. And so let's add an evaluator for our workflow import step as well. But for the workflow import, just in case errors might occur or something like that, let's do a document type evaluator. And I didn't have any document types assigned to this guy. So let's make a new capture process here. Kind of like sweep import. Import. Here we go. Okay, so we'll make that a sweep. And we will assign a default directory, which I already have kind of selected here, that path right on the desktop, that folder. Like I mentioned, 2 different ways to bring something in. That workflow import. And an ICAP step. And so in that design tab, we'll add those evaluators from that sweep directory, and we'll just make it a default. So everything that gets swept in will just go straight to that ICAP processing. And we will also add an evaluator for the workflow import. And so for this one, we're going to do it based on document type here. And so, just in case something, wrong may occur, we want to ensure that only these AP type documents are coming into the scan queue. And so when I select this evaluator, you'll see that you have all the conditions set here. And so these need to be, any one of the, this document type or this one or this one. And you do have the ability to edit this at any time and remove or add additional document types. So let's add an evaluator to send things out of ICAP processing to that index step. And we'll just have it go ahead and send everything to this indexing step. And then, so once again, just to not confuse our end users with what's going on, we'll limit what it is they can see. So right now, by default, all of the user groups assigned to the scan queue are getting added to each one of these processes. But you have the ability to adjust that accordingly. So my AP clerk doesn't need to be doing any indexing, and neither do my scanners. But yeah, perfect. So our indexers will be doing their process here. So let's add an exception in case a document ended up in there and it has nothing to do with accounts payable, and they're not, your indexers see it. And so let's give them the ability to send that to exception. And so with an evaluator, we can send that over and add an ad hoc evaluator. And so now within this step, they'll get that custom action, selectable button, much like a workflow action within workflow, that they can select and send it to that exception queue. So there's a few ways that you can add evaluators. You can actually just write on the queue itself. We can just add an ad hoc evaluator and tell it which queue it is we want it to go to. And so we'll add that ad hoc evaluator, and so they will now have that option to kick it off to exceptions. And so let's control the user groups that have access to exceptions, and let's have it just so that our management personnel have access to that exceptions queue. And we can go ahead and select a rescan option as well. and give our indexers the option to mark these documents for rescan with an ad hoc evaluator. And a document separation step here. And so we'll do another evaluator. So when your indexers are going in there and they're actually coding it, document status, and when they say, okay, yes, this is an index document, it'll go ahead and go into this document separation queue. And that's where we're going to want our clerk and our managers to be able to have access. But yeah, so I mean, like I said, you know, it has that easy visual representation. We covered everything that was in this toolbox here, kind of what those additional property steps that are available for, you know, these import steps, the fact that we can have multiple import steps, and these available processing options for each one of them. You know, some blank page separation upon import, some patch codes, your indexers and what it is the numeric or main enter keys will be doing. So you know, if they hit the enter key, it's going to mark that document for index. There are some miscellaneous options as well, like confirm index. So when a user marks it for index, it's going to throw a message, you know, that, hey, are you sure? Let's have document separation go ahead and clear some keywords out. But yeah, so let's go into one that I put together. I guess first of all, so like I was getting at before, so I have this scan queue called Webinar Capture Process. And within this scan queue, I have more than one capture process configured, but only one of them at a time can be active. And so what we're going to want to do is go ahead and save what we have so far. And so to make this the active capture process, we simply publish it. And then that one becomes the active one that your end users would interact with rather than the webinar capture process. You are able to edit an active scan queue that currently, you know, has documents going into it and things are happening. There are a couple nuances with that as far as, you know, attempting to delete a step. Like, you know, I want to get rid of this indexing step. It will not allow you to delete it if there are documents already in there, as well as any kind of normal thing, even if it's not an active process. Like right now, we know there's no documents in here. So let's go ahead and try to delete. And we should, oh, maybe not. All fine. Yeah, a lot of the times if you have these evaluators set up, it's not going to allow you to delete something because you're going to break some logic. That being said, it does allow you to kind of do what it is you'd like in here, and then you leverage that same workflow Docker capability, just like within workflow, letting you know that, you know, some of your logic is not quite right. You may either have a loop or it's not actually going to go anywhere. There's no, you know, there's no awaiting commit step. Yes, let's do some PDF conversion, and none of your users need to be able to see that that's happening. So it's going to be more or less a background process. And we'll convert those to PDF, and then we'll go ahead and commit those documents. And we just do a default evaluator here. But yeah, so here's just another capture process that I designed earlier. So like I said, some of those best practices of the naming convention when you're naming these status steps, because that's the way in which they'll appear in the Unity client. The AP sweep import, so we see we have the sweep, we have a default directory, and then the evaluator here is a default, so anything being swept in is just going. We have this AP import from workflow. And we can check out the evaluator. And so it either needs to be an AP invoice, a non-PO invoice, or a PO invoice, which is then hitting this ICAP processing, which is going to be assigning, reading those keyword values or reading the information off that page and assigning some initial keyword values and even setting the document type. So it sees that this is either a PO or a non-PO invoice. And so we have these ad hoc evaluators here based on document status, not ad hoc evaluators, but evaluators based on document status type. And so if it is a non-PO invoice, ICAP processing will send it to the separate indexing step here that our AP indexers have access to, that will be handling the non-PO invoices. And this other evaluator here based on document type or PO invoices, which will be sending them to this indexing step, which our AP indexers also have access to do the indexing for that. Each of these indexing steps have an ad hoc evaluator. If they would like to, they'll have that option where, you know, if they're just not quite sure about what they're seeing on that invoice, they have the option to select that button and kick it to this verify step. And so that exists for both of these indexing queues. And so in this verify step, we have just our manager type user groups that can get in there and take action on those documents and say, you know, yes, this is fine, and push it back into the process. Yep, and then there's the exception step as well. So if either indexers ever see that, you know, a document they just received has absolutely nothing to do with PO or AP rather, they can kick it to the exception step, which once again, your manager user groups can get in there and either purge or send those off accordingly. And then this evaluator right here is based on document status. So once your indexer is coded as index, it's going to go ahead and kick it out to that awaiting commit status. But yeah, so pretty straightforward. The best way to learn this is to get in here and play around with it and just do some testing. Just kind of those basic concepts of remembering to, you know, save and reset the cache before going on. What I really like about Capture Process is that, you know, a lot of times in workflow, you're looking around at things and you're trying to make a change, but things are grayed out, and that's because you didn't check it out. Where in Capture Process, you know, simply for you to get this view to pop up, you know, you need to double click on it anyway, which essentially is you checking it out. So it's nice because you never get, you know, pinged with, you know, you need to have it checked out and things of that nature. And by saving it, it will automatically just check that back in. And then, as I mentioned before, that that publish feature allows you to, make it the active process that your end users will actually interact with. All right, so I was gonna go over sweeping some documents in this capture process that I had configured here, but it looks like we're gonna be a little short on time. So I'll go ahead and move on to kind of our next phase of the webinar here. Let's switch this back to that guy. Perfect. All right, so yeah, so that's going to conclude today's webinar. But we do have a couple minutes, and I have the questions box fully expanded out here if anybody has any questions at this point in time that I can maybe, you know, hop back onto that VM and I can, you know, kind of show you some things and how things are going to interact with each other. In the Unity client, that's right. Yeah, so it's going to look a lot like just a normal scan queue process. But I'll go ahead and try to show that to you just real quick here before we hit time. All right, so within the Unity client, you have your batch scanning and batch processing options under the imaging box here. And here we can see all the scan queues that are configured and published. So we have that existing scan code process and that webinar capture process that we had here. So right from here, either, if you're configured with Mailbox Importer, that'll be bringing things right into a particular scan queue, or you have your scanners actually come in and do some ad hoc scanning or to sweep. And so, like I said, I had that default sweep directory, so it's already there. So we can just sweep all files in a particular directory, and which was already set. And so we'll sweep those in. And so, yeah, so I just have some PDFs here for some PO versus non-PO invoices. But so right from here, we can just go straight to that batch. And you'll see what it looks like within that batch processing tab. So this layout is the same as if we, let's get out of here, if we just went straight to batch processing. But yeah, so right here is kind of what that's going to look like. You see that, we have that ICAP processing. We have one in there right now. And then, it's awaiting for that processing to actually occur on it. There are sub-statuses of awaiting. So when the ICAP is actually on the data capture server is executing, that sub-status will be updated to processing. So a lot of this is hitting refresh and having it go through these automated processes. And then your indexer. So right now I'm logged in as manager, so I'm seeing all of the steps. But if I was logged in as an indexer, I set it so I don't want to see this document, this ICAP process, or some of these other verify or exception steps and things like that. So we don't have anything in exceptions. But if we did, we'd select that batch and then we'd hit start processing. But as your indexers, you only want to have them access to that index step, so they have that available there. So yeah, so that's what it's going to look like. And then just like within workflow, you have, any kind of ad hoc evaluators to, if I had a batch in here, to send, to send it to rescan, or to, for your indexers to be able to send it to exceptions or send it to rescan. So I have a question about PDF conversion, and does this need any special licenses for PDF creation? And I am 90% sure that it does. That PDF kind of conversion and creation does require additional licensing. If that is not the case, I can certainly reach out to you after this. Do we have any other questions while we have just a minute left here? When can we expect the Capture Process Designer to be accessible via the web client? And so, yeah, so really what you're looking for is to have those custom scan queues be able to be interacting within a web client. Yeah, because currently any kind of scan queue you configure with that Enable Capture Process Designer and configure with an OnBase Studio is only able to be interacted with within the Unity client. As far as future expectations to have these custom scan queues be available in the web client, I'm unsure at this time, but I can certainly take a note of that and reach back out to you if I have any additional details. Excellent question. Do we have any others, as we have just another minute here? All right then, so to kind of close this thing out, we have our current versions here of OnBase 18, Teleforms, 16, 3.1. So the next webinar is What is Workflow? This is going to be November 14th at 10 a.m. And it's accounts payable. The next webinar is not What is Workflow. The next webinar is accounts payable and how to improve the efficiency and accuracy of the operation. And so the next kind of big thing coming up here is right here in October. We have the Naviant Summit coming up. Those of you who have attended in the past are familiar with this. It's, you know, it's a very exciting and fun event. Lots of very useful information, lots of opportunities for networking and to get some face time with those Naviant personnel. All right, so it's going to take us right to time here. So thank you again for joining me. You know, I'm glad we had this opportunity to cover the Capture Process Designer and to get in there and to get a feel, you know, kind of for that look and feel of it. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to support at Naviant at any time. Also, as far as future topics for future webinars, for kind of more these technical dive-ins, we're always open to suggestions, because what it is you guys want to hear about and learn about is what it is we want to give you. So definitely, you know, please just reach out with any kind of ideas for future webinars as well. All right, well, thank you all so much for your time and have a great rest of the day.